we've picked up quite a bit of recruiting work from December into January. A lot of companies are trying to start fresh and project their growth for the year. And so it begs the question, why should I use an employment application as an employer?
Mhm.
And shouldn't a resume or submission through a job board be enough?
Mhm.
So, Summer, where do we start? Where do we start in this topic? There's so much to unpack.
Oh my. Well, I would start by saying that if you are a small business and you are asking, well, yeah, why? Like, why shouldn't I use just a submission through a job board or a resume? Definitely listen up because we have a lot to add on this topic. Certainly, just kind of some of the highlights are that there is a very big difference between somebody just giving you their resume or applying through a major job board and an application. So, of course, one of the main reasons that you would want to use an application is that you're going to collect consistent information for every single individual. So, that's number one. And when you think about being able to make comparisons between candidates, you can do that easier because you have the same information in the same place for every single individual. But here's a big one. The big one is what I call an attestation. And, that is that little statement at the bottom where they sign it that says something to the effect of all of the information that's been provided is accurate and truthful, and then there's usually a statement that says, if it's found that, I have falsified this application, I may be terminated as a result. So something along those lines. So it's pretty much saying if there's something on here and you're misrepresenting yourself and you're hired as a result, then you may lose your job if we find out. So that's really important because where is that on a resume and where is that on your job board? So it's not saying you couldn't do it if that's what you found out. It's just this is going to make it a little bit easier. Uh, and then kind of the last one that I wanted to point out because there's so much, and I do have a fun story to share at the end if there's time, is that when you have an application process, most companies ask for a voluntary self-identification. So, for those of you that are subject to EEO reporting, you're probably familiar that these are the questions that ask about vet status. They ask about disability, about accommodations. Those types of questions you're likely familiar with. Those aren't part of, when somebody submits a resume or if they're applying to a job board. So, those are just kind of my quick thoughts on like the difference between the employment application, resumes, and the job board. But what are your thoughts on that, Joey?
Yeah, I think that technology has come a long way because I remember the pain point of having to complete paper applications, the pain point of, hey, why do I have to upload my resume and then create a job application? I remember these pain points, and
Right.
technology has made it a lot easier for folks to apply to jobs, get jobs, go on and live happy lives. But the value is that we can't overlook the job application, as you said, as a basis of equity in the
Mm-hmm.
process and making sure that everybody's asked the same questions. It also, I look at it as a way to confirm up to date information. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, someone may upload a resume, or they may, one click their LinkedIn information, but a phone number may have changed or an email address may have changed. And so you're trying to reach out to a candidate whose contact information has changed. And
Mm-hmm.
so a job application allows you to say, hey, as of today, what is your best contact information? How can I
Right.
reach you? We had a customer one time who was subject to an EEO-1 report, which is something that federal contractors have to pay attention to um, with regard to equality in a lot of their employment practices. And the challenge that they ran up against is that they didn't have a job application, so they couldn't track candidate data.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one thing to be prepared and have this data and just need to sort it out. It's
Mm-hmm.
another to not have the data and you need it, and you can't just go back and ask the 800 candidates who applied for jobs with you last year,
Mm-hmm.
hey, could you self-identify your race, ethnicity, gender, and veteran status?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's all about making sure you are equitable, but also making sure that you have the data you need in the event
Mm-hmm.
that you're subject to that information. And I
Mm-hmm.
forgot to mention we covered cover letters too in episode
Mm-hmm.
4. If anyone is interested in checking out our conversation about whether cover letters are dead or not. So
Mm-hmm.
those are my thoughts.
Really great thoughts, Joey. And a few things that I wanted to add to that is we talked a little bit about the EEO and those voluntary self identifications. And one of the conversations that I have pretty frequently with clients is, well, that doesn't apply to me, so I'm not going to ask those questions. And I really wanted to kind of challenge that thinking because while it may be true that you aren't required to collect that information, why wouldn't you want to collect that information for the purposes of ensuring that your hiring practices are non-discriminatory and that you don't have pieces of your process that are preventing you from reaching your diversity goals? Because if you have the data, then you can start to analyze it, as we discussed in the first part of the show. And I think that you can start to pick apart whether there are steps in your process and things that you can do to yield better results. And for me, that's a reason alone to collect the data and do something meaningful with it. And if you are a small business and you're wondering, well, how do I navigate this to make sure that the data is being used in a way that is legal, that's going to yield desired results? That's what we're here for, and we'd love to have those conversations to see what that will look like in your organization.
Definitely, definitely. So I would let's take the conversation a little bit further and talk about, you know, if we talk about the candidate journey,
Mm-hmm.
when do you think is the ideal time to insert that job application? Is it, on the job descriptions landing page? Is
Mm-hmm.
it after you've vetted a few candidates and you want to get to the final interview rounds? Is that when you
Mm-hmm.
throw out the application? Because I've really found that companies just just put it wherever, right? So the person that, and I've been hired in places years ago before starting Jumpstart, hired in places where I didn't get the application until it was my first day at work,
Right.
and so I'm the only one that completed the application. So
Mm-hmm.
when do you think is the best place to insert that application in a job search process?
Well, that is, I think, a much debated topic. And I actually read quite a few articles about how even, the current ATS and application processes, even as simplified and automated as they have become, are still yet, creating a barrier for many applicants, just, being frustrated and abandoning them. So I think that's a highly debated topic. But in my opinion, I think that it should be at the point that a candidate is initially applying for the job. Because when I think about using some of the voluntary data to evaluate diversity in hiring, you need to understand from the very beginning what type of candidates are you attracting. So if you're not asking these questions now at this first stage, then you're missing out on an entire slice, an entire view of the equation. So I
Yep,
think for that reason, it should be at the very earliest stage possible.
yep. I'd agree. I'd agree. You want to make sure that you're capturing that data on the front end,
Mhm.
and maybe you pare it down and get to the essentials of what you need to collect, and leave out the things that aren't really of importance.
Mhm.
But you do need to have an application that is standardized and collects the key data that's going to help
Mhm.
you make decisions and help you respond to any reporting that you have to do later on down the
Mhm.
road.
Agreed. Now I'm so curious, Joey. Do you have any really interesting or frightening stories, shall I say, about a time when an application uncovered something um, that was alarming or was concerning, or you're like, my goodness, I'm so glad they filled out an application because. So
Yep.
I've got one, but I'm curious to hear if you do as well.
Yeah, I have one. I'm not gonna say which employer this was at, but this was when I was working as a professional, and the candidate was fresh out of graduate school, and their email address that they put on their application was something like "always stay blazed 487" or like "always stay blazed 420." And so at that time, marijuana it was looked at differently then than it is now. And it was just interesting that someone would put that email address as opposed to a professional one on their application to work in a professional setting. So that was a fun one. The email address, it was a non-starter, but that person could have used some coaching on
Mhm.
how to put their professional email on their
Mhm.
application. What about you?
Oh man, that's a great example. I can't tell you how many times I've seen similar on resumes, and I agree. It's kind of a non-starter. It's like, well, if you aren't able to make a sound enough decision to create a professional email for purposes of getting a job, then what is that telling me about your decision making? Probably not the best. But I have I have so many stories, but I wanted to really point out an example of something I've encountered many times over the course of recruiting, interviewing candidates and using their resume, and then verifying the information against their application. So,
Mm,
one of the things, unfortunately, that I've seen on many resumes, unfortunately, is ambiguity in regards to graduating with a diploma. So
mm, mhm,
sometimes I will see things that will show the name of the school, the program, and maybe there will be years, or maybe it will just be the name of the school and the program, just kind of combinations that when you would look at it, the reader would assume that if it's on the resume that they completed the program. Am I right?
yep.
Right. But the application typically asks not only that information, name of school, but it will also ask specifically, did you graduate? And I can't tell you how many times on the resume it will appear as though they completed the program, but on the application it's clear that they didn't. So, kind of my takeaway is please make sure that if that isn't on your application, that it is, but also during your screening and interview processes, that you are specifically asking that question
Yeah.
because it is an area that unfortunately I think there are too many people still trying to fly it under the radar.
Yeah. Yeah, and to be honest, the way that we look at work and workers has evolved so much now that to not have a degree isn't a hindrance in the way that it
Mhm,
may have been before. I mean, there are laws in place that have always been in place that said it should be education and slash or years of experience. But we
mhm,
know the stigma that comes with, oh, they didn't have a bachelor's, they didn't have a master's, whatever the
mhm,
case may be. But now that it's not that much of the case. I mean, we have individuals who are learning to code on their own and going on to get
right.
tech jobs. We have professionals who are getting certifications
Mhm,
and taking a lot of great knowledge worker positions. So you don't have to hide yourself anymore. Um, for the most part, I think you
mhm,
don't have to hide yourself and your stats. You'll be welcome as long as you can prove that you can do the job.
mhm,
So yeah, I've seen that. It's been confusing. You got to hop on the phone and call and just verify everything. Very much a time consuming thing.